And the presence of Cambodia allows Myanmar and Vietnam in particular make it difficult to reach consensus, and certainly makes it difficult to open up trade. So there is some truth in the notion that there's little enforcement and lots of photo ops and talk shops and so forth. And this does divert Asian attention away from global institutions and other kinds of things. There's only a limited amount of diplomatic resources available. So where is the U.S. in all of this? As I said at the beginning, I think we're out to lunch. I think we're preoccupied. Every administration seems to get bogged down in the Middle East. I mean, people who study Asia, which is, as I defined it, including India, is half the world, keep wondering why we don't pay more sustained attention to Asia as a whole region. We don't seem to have a regional strategy. I think we're somewhat insensitive to the effect of U.S. policies in that part of the world. And I'm thinking specifically about the Muslims in Asia. Indonesia alone has more Muslims than the entire Middle East, including Iran. And in the age of media and high-tech communication, Muslims anyway have become quite worked up about the treatment of the Palestinians and our support for Israel, and all of that debate plays out rather badly over there. This is a region where Islam has always taken a very moderate form and still does, but there are cells of radical Muslim movements. There's this Wahhabi stuff coming in from Saudi Arabia and so on, and we need to pay more attention to that. I think we're doing something, but not enough, and not enough at a high level. Every time I say that we're out to lunch, the office directors and below at the State Department say, oh, but we have this initiative and that initiative. Well, it's tiny amounts of money, actually, except there's separate education in Indonesia, which is up to 100 million, I think, which is not bad. But it's still tiny amounts of money compared to what we spend in the Middle East. And it's more important than that. It's not sold at a high level. It's very hard to get presidents to travel if they don't get something tangible, especially as far away as Asia. We did just get Secretary Gates in the region, and he made very conciliatory diplomatic noises. I was very pleased about that, but that's an exception. The U.S.-ASEAN summit that was supposed to be held in 2007, Bush canceled it. There were two regional forum meetings, as they're called, that ASEAN held. Secretary of State usually goes. Condoleezza Rice has missed two of them in the last 3 years. This is the sort of thing which doesn't take a lot of effort, but would go a long way. So I think in my final chapter I actually offer some suggestions for both Asians and Americans. I do think, to end on an optimistic note, I think it's a very stable region of the world. I think the diplomacy going on is a very constructive way of handling China and the regional problems that they face. I think it's going to take a very long time before you have anything like a sustainable integration, form of integration. It's not comparable to Europe. They don't want to pool sovereignty. But I think it's a whole lot better than going to war. So with that, there are lots and lots of topics that I haven't mentioned, and many more are on your minds. So why don't we open it up and have a discussion? Oh, yeah. No, I'll be happy to. Do I see a hand somewhere? Yes, in back. Well, let me separate out Myanmar at first, because I don't. To be honest, I don't know that anybody can solve that problem. Let me talk about Myanmar separately, and then I'll get back to the basics of your question. The Southeast Asians have failed with Myanmar, and they say that. They have tried to influence the government in Rangoon. Now it's moved to a different capital. I call it Myanmar, by the way, but the official U.S. government position is to call it Burma, but it's the same country. The Southeast Asians have failed to change the behavior of the regime or to secure release of Aung San Suu Kyi. But I don't think we can criticize them for that. I don't think any regime whose very survival is at stake, one that is as tenuous and corrupt as that one, is going to leave easily. I don't think it helps for us to keep sanctioning Burma and to keep imposing economic sanctions and to keep calling for economic sanctions, except very targeted ones. And this begins to get at your question. At the Peterson Institute for International Economics, where I'm affiliated, they've looked at sanctions going back to 1919 on a case study basis, and they found that most of them don't succeed in their goal. What they do is they set up a black market of contraband goods, which the elites deal in, getting even richer, and poor people suffer. So any talk like that, to answer the question, your question negatively, doesn't help at all. It just widens the split between us and ASEAN, and it doesn't, in my view, solve the basic problem. I don't know what the solution to Myanmar is. It may just take a lot of time. I think also we've got to stop applying double standards vis-a-vis Myanmar. One of the Southeast Asian ambassadors said to me the other day, you know, Myanmar is an important source of natural gas for Thailand. And she went so far as to say that Myanmar's gas is to Thailand what Saudi Arabia's oil is to the West. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but if you think about it, we don't criticize certain governments that violate human rights, but we do criticize Myanmar. Now, I recognize that there's serious differences between Myanmar and Saudi Arabia, but the point is the lecturing and the hectoring and the sanctions kind of approach, I think, doesn't help at all on Myanmar. On ASEAN as a whole, the willingness to hold the summit last year, even though the president pulled out of it, was a step forward. There was a long time when the U.S. wouldn't meet with ASEAN as a group because they thought it would legitimize the Burmese regime. So I think that's been an improvement. I'd like to see the U.S.-ASEAN summit rescheduled in Asia. President Bush invited them all to come to Crawford, but that isn't going to do it. So part one of my package deal is reschedule the U.S.-ASEAN summit. Part two is sign the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation. There's a significant body of thought that says this has to go to the Senate because it's called the treaty. It has no treaty obligations. The Australians managed to sign it with a letter saying that this really doesn't change any of our defense obligations. I think we can do the same thing, and I think we ought to do it. The symbolic importance would be terrific. I think we ought to do a whole lot more in health and medicine. After the tsunami, the hospital ship Mercy, which is a Navy ship, went around the region. We get huge goodwill whenever we do that. Unfortunately, most of the resources are in military hands, and I only say unfortunate because I'd like to see a better balance in our presence in Southeast Asia between military and non-military resources. That's over time, the non-military resources proportionate to the whole have declined, and the military find themselves doing a whole lot of things that they aren't even necessarily trained to do, you know, nation building and all this kind of stuff. Let's see, with some of the other things, I'd like more help for, I think we overdid it on anti-terrorism in 9/11, requiring, one of the first things that happened after that was we required young Indonesian men to be fingerprinted in this country, and we made it more difficult for people to get visas. I think our soft power assets in the field of education and exchange are enormous, enormous, and we made it harder for people to come to the U.S. And harder for them to study here. Any older Asian who has been on the Fulbright program years ago will tell you what a transforming experience that is. But by reducing that and by cutting off, in the case of some countries, military to military education, I think we narrowed the scope of our contacts and cut ourselves off from Asia. And then, this is just the things I can remember that I wrote about. There may be more. But handling the U.S.-China relationship turns out to be really key. I didn't start out this way. I deliberately tried not to have a U.S.-centered approach. But in fact, I came around to thinking that that's almost the single biggest variable in Asia's future, including Southeast Asia. So handling China properly, I think, is important. And I give ourselves pretty good grades on that one. I don't think we're out to lunch there. I just think we have to engage China regionally as well. bilaterally.